Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to another episode. Today is, of course, the 2026 Chinese Grand Prix race review, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about this time because, as you know, Aaron, a lot happened in this race. Aaron, how are you doing, first of all?
I am doing very well. Thank you for asking. We definitely do have a lot of things to discuss about the weekend because as you know, it was a sprint race. So even more things that went on. But I think before we get into the actual weekend, let's talk about the news that the Bahrain Grand Prix and the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix are officially cancelled and there will not be any replacements.
No, indeed. Of course, going on it is due to the ongoing Middle East conflict, and that means that we will only have a 22 race calendar. And also, it does put into jeopardy the Qatar and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix later on this year. Of course, we haven't got any news regarding the two final Grand Prix, but still. I mean, swings and roundabouts, I suppose, for the fans is something that realistically we don't want because we see less racing. But for the teams, especially those struggling in this first stage of the season, it's definitely some sort of relief, isn't it, for them?
Oh, for sure. And I think there was talks of changing the regulations before the Japanese Grand Prix, but now those discussions will now be moved to after the Japanese Grand Prix. So over the 4 week break, we might get some news that could bring some of the midfield teams back into contention. And I think the month will definitely give a couple of drivers a bit of time to do some much needed reflection before we go to Miami.
Definitely. It's almost like we've got a summer break in April, and yeah, the meeting that F1 was supposed to have will be set for after Japan. But I mean, I think it was down to more the clipping and more of how to eradicate that, which some teams really do not want. But let's talk about this weekend. A lot of history has been made this weekend. And I think for me, my most memorable moment.
Yeah, a really mature drive from the 19-year-old. I mean, he beat the record for the youngest pole position by 2 years, surpassing Sebastian Vettel's that he set in the Italian Grand Prix in 2008, the youngest to convert a pole to a win. And yeah, a really mature drive from the 19-year-old overall. I mean, if you look at his performance in the sprint race, it wasn't the best start. He slipped down to eighth after the first few corners, collided with Isaac Hadjar. And I think at that point, everyone was thinking, and probably including Toto Wolff, that is he a little bit too green for this? Does he crack under pressure? But no, I mean, over the rest of the race, he really made some good overtakes and recovered to fifth. He got that pole, and then once he got past Lewis Hamilton after the first couple of laps, he really just walked away with the race. I think he only made one mistake
Yeah,
around lap
it was the
54. He went deep into the hairpin.
lock up at the hairpin with 3 laps ago. But I completely agree with you. It was definitely I suppose a more mature drive, which we kind of, especially this year, were yet to see. You talk about sprint and you talk about his starts, and we were even talking before this weekend about how if he can manage to get his starts settled down and at least just maintain position, he can definitely have the pace to fight those ahead. The sprint was, yeah, a poor start, reckless with Hajar, who really did not like the way Antonelli went up to him after the Grand Prix. I think they had a little bit of a confrontation in Park Ferme, but this time out on Sunday, he had a fantastic start, did what he needed to do, let the Ferraris fight with each other, and aside from that little lockup, there was pretty much faultless. He could match Russell when he needed to. He was setting fastest laps during that hard tire stint. And I have a feeling, well, I know now that my bold prediction of Antonelli not winning a Grand Prix has gone completely down the pot by round two. And I would say I definitely did not expect this type of level from Antonelli so early on in the season. So the question has to beg, in terms of a world championship, is there a fight on?
Definitely, the gap is down to 4 points, I think,
Yeah, 4 points.
between Russell and Antonelli. I think those two are definitely the favourites. I think Ferrari, they are behind them, but there's definitely a noticeable gap between them. And then I would say the top three teams at the moment are the Mercedes, the Ferrari, and then I'm gonna say the McLarens. We've got a bit more data now. Obviously, Oscar Piastri two DNSs in two races.
Yeah.
Um, Norris had issues getting his car to the grid and obviously did not start that race, but they performed well in the sprint race. They were hanging with the Ferraris, and I think a bit more promising.
I mean, we might as well get into it now. McLaren and Red Bull, the world champions for the last, what, 4 or 5 years. McLaren are coming off two world championships in 2025, and they've absolutely had an appalling start to their championship campaign. Two DNSs, the first time a McLaren driver has had two DNSs in a row consecutively since 1969, which is a very long time ago. And it does beg the question, if it was, for me personally, if it was the same problem on both cars, it would have been a little bit more like, okay, there's more reliability. But two different problems on two different cars is a little bit of an issue. And compared to how many people? There were five people that did not start the Chinese Grand Prix this year. Does beg the question, is reliability worse than we expected, Aaron?
Yep, definitely worse than we expected. I mean, it's all right to give a little bit of leeway because we do have the new regulations. Obviously, teams are still adapting, but I mean, we've already seen massive improvements in this race compared to the last race. Remember last episode we were talking about uh perhaps an artificial element to the racing where it was just passing, back passing, and then the same moves being repeated, especially in the starting sequence. There's already been some improvements on that front, and I think over the season goes on and the teams get more of an understanding of the new changes to the regulations, I think we're definitely going to be seeing less cars being unable to start the race.
Yeah, definitely. It's not a good look for F1 in the slightest. I believe we had what 17 finishes from this Grand Prix. Let's talk a little bit more about the people that didn't finish. Most notably for me was the Aston Martins this weekend, and there's been talk about how coming into the season they were on the back foot. Australia was expected that they weren't really going to finish the Grand Prix, but to have two consecutive double DNFs in a row, I think for me is probably the worst start for a team I've seen. And I mean, I didn't know if you saw Aaron, but Fernando Alonso couldn't even keep his hands on the steering wheel, which shows how difficult it is to drive. And in honesty, where is it from up for Aston Martin? I mean, there's only a week for them before they go to Japan. Could they turn around in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, good point about Aston Martin. I mean, Alonso's come out being very critical of the new regulations, calling it the battery powered world championship. So he clearly sees the involvement of the battery as being far too high in the racing. We also said in our predictions video that Cadillac we're going to find the biggest uphill battle. But as they say in Formula One, to finish first you have to finish. And the
Mhm.
fact is that Cadillac have been able to finish these Grand Prix and the Aston Martin haven't. And Lance Stroll retiring on lap 10. I mean, it's not a good look for Lawrence Stroll's team, which he's invested billions of pounds in.
Definitely. I mean, to be fair, talking about Cadillac, they scored their first double finish of a Grand Prix and a P14 for them, which is a feat, definitely. And they were battling the Aston Martins throughout most of the sprint and the Grand Prix. That's if they didn't crash into each other at the start. But let's talk about the overtaking now, and let's talk about the racing in general. We were looking at Australia, and we both said that is very entertaining, but is not entertaining in the right way we felt F1 should be more focusing on. Now, fast forward a week later to China, and we had not just one but two different races where we saw this new level of racing take place. I would say that it wasn't as bad as I expected. And I would say that that battle, especially between both Ferraris in both the sprint and the race, was thoroughly enjoyable. The question is, I have for you, Aaron, is does it really represent the driver's skill compared to what we had DRS in the last 10 years or so?
You know what? I am glad I wasn't too quick to cast judgment on the new overtaking style that has emerged because we definitely saw an improvement this race. I think perhaps that's due to the nature of the circuit as well with the twisty turns. Um, I think driver skill definitely plays a role. I think some drivers have become a bit more comfortable with the involvement of the battery. Look at Lewis Hamilton. He actually said it was the most fun he'd had racing in his career. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have Max Verstappen hitting out anyone who liked the regulations, saying that you're basically a casual if you even like this type of racing. So I think driver skill is still at the forefront, and I think that it's just a case of enjoyment for the drivers.
What I would say definitely comparing it to DRS is that in DRS, it was a very slam dunk effect in that there was only one or two straights on each circuit which you were able to overtake at. And we were expecting it to be, let's say for China, it would be realistically last year down the back straight, that was your best chance. I think it might be I think the reason why people aren't as kind of open to these regulations is because of change. We don't really expect that much overtaking at so many different places on the track. If you look at even the Hamilton Leclerc battle, even going through turn, I think it's 7, 8, and 9, which you would never ever see a Formula One car try and overtake. I've never seen it in my life a Formula One car overtake. Um, I think it's just different, but at the same time, I think the new battery system definitely kind of it changes the style of driving. But I think for, I suppose, the counter-intuitive side of it is that qualifying is a little bit boring. I don't know what you would have to say on qualifying, but I feel like it's very more battery dependent, which means that there's less sort of need to go for any sort of risk involved.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Going on with your first point, yeah, I think it was pretty clear with the role of DRS. You are in China, especially though there are two main straights where all the moves were made, or I'd say a solid 80 to 90% are made. Um, but with the new batteries, I mean, we saw moves down into turn six. We saw Hamilton getting past Russell for the lead in the sprint race into turn nine, and I think
Yeah,
it just unlocks a whole new realm of possibilities for overtakes. You might be right about people not wanting to adapt to this, but I think it makes the race more exciting. And I guess there's less anticipation over the whole lap, and I guess a bit of tuning out in the middle of the lap as fans we would have used to realize that okay, an overtake's not going to be made here. It's just can the car stay within the 1 second window? It was more like okay, the move could be made here. Uh, and yeah, that's what happened a lot with the Ferraris. Um, to go on to your second point, I would say that the racing is definitely more exciting. But we still got to give it time.
definitely. I mean, you look at Australia, which is very high speed circuit. You look at China, where it's more kind of downforce dependent. I think a real test would be in the places last year. So your Suzukas, your Hungaries, your Zandvoorts, to see if overtaking is improved there. Because if they are improved there, then that could open a whole new different type of racing in terms of racing at more old school tracks. But Japan will definitely be a test to see if, to be fair, it might be that going into turn one would be a place to overtake as usual. Maybe going into the hairpin after you go underneath the bridge could be a place. So we'll see definitely. But it's almost like they're racing in the wet, in the dry, I would say, with this new battery system. But let's talk about I would say the Ferrari battle was absolutely exceptional, but more about Lewis Hamilton. First podium with Scuderia. It's been a long-awaited 26 races for him in red to get that podium. How do you think, well, realistically, do you think that this is a new Lewis Hamilton we're seeing, or is this just him, uh, just back to usual? The last couple of years have been just a blip.
Yeah, I think he's clearly shown he's still got it. He was really giving Charles Leclerc a run for his money. He was holding off George Russell in the initial stages. He took the lead in the sprint race. I think he's really enjoys the new regulations, but he's also had a bit more of an involvement in the development with this car. You remember in 2025, he was coming into Leclerc's designs, Leclerc's vision for the car, so he had to be the one learning, and he's not used to that. Whenever it's always been either it was Bottas coming into the team or George Russell coming into the team. So that was definitely a learning curve for Hamilton, I think. I think with this extra confidence, he seems happy in the car. He's clearly very comfortable around Japan. I mean, we've seen what he can do. He's won the race multiple times. I think that we've got to watch this space in terms of Lewis, because I definitely don't think it's over yet for the seven-time world champion.
I really do hope that Ferrari could. I mean, and I think this will only be a matter of time, but Ferrari can definitely close the gap in terms of race pace to the Mercedes because we saw it this time twice this time where the Ferraris have had an absolutely amazing start, get the lead, but then within around 8 or 10 laps they just kind of just don't have that edge that Mercedes seem to just have in terms of race pace. But I mean, qualifying pace, Ferrari looks still a little bit off it. But we really haven't talked a lot about Kimi Antonelli in terms of, I suppose, his sorry, not Kimi Antonelli, sorry, George Russell in terms of his weekend. And I felt that to be fair, he didn't have the pace to go and win on Sunday. Um, do you think that this was just a little bit of an off weekend, or is it more that we genuinely might have some sort of a championship battle happening? Because it took a long time for him to get past those Ferraris.
Yeah, I think so. I think circumstances definitely play a role. I think with Stroll retiring on lap 10, you had that manic rush to the pits. And I think Russell just ended up behind the Ferraris. And yeah, he definitely did struggle to overtake the three of them. Obviously, it made for some amazing races, amazing racing, but I definitely think he would have been getting angry behind that cockpit of his Mercedes, trying to just make the move wherever possible. But I mean, he did start to close the gap down to Antonelli in the closing stage of the races. I remember it was 8 seconds down to about 6.5 by the time they crossed the finish line. So I think circumstances definitely play a role. I think they're 1-1 in terms of head-to-head battles in the race. So definitely exciting times.
And I do have to ask you the question: if Ferrari were to implement team orders during that battle, did you think that the Ferraris had the pace to go and challenge Antonelli out front?
I don't think so, to be completely honest with you. And I know I might sound a little bit controversial, but I think you can see at this point, if you've watched F1 for a long enough time, you can see when a car's not necessarily faster, but they're able to keep a faster car behind. And you can do that a lot more tactically now with the new energy system. And I think we definitely saw a little bit of that with Hamilton and Leclerc basically holding off Russell for, I think it was around 10 laps where they were just switching positions. So I don't think Ferrari are there just yet. As you said in the qualifying as well, it's clearly more emphasized the gap because that's one lap pace. There's much less tactical play going on. But you never know. Ferrari could definitely innovate and challenge them, or we might not see that. We might see Mercedes run away with the title and have Leclerc and Hamilton just battling for P3 and P4.
I would especially say with Bahrain and Saudi being cancelled and only 22 races, is that there is definitely going to be a war in development. And I know both teams will definitely come Miami. They might nearly be different cars to what they were in Japan, but only time will tell, I suppose. Let's talk about people that haven't had the best of weekends. I think Red Bull notably had a really poor weekend, considering their somewhat decent pace in Melbourne. You you look at I suppose the likes of Hajar down in P8, I believe, or P7, and the Verstappen DNF. Um, what do you think caused this almost complete change in pace from looking at podium runners in Melbourne to maybe middle of the midfield in China? Is this track specific, or is this just a problem that they'll have to keep on top of?
Yeah, I think this is where reliability comes into it. And I think you've almost just transitioned me into introducing my loser of the week, which I'm going to say is Max Verstappen. Uh,
Oh,
defi- Definitely not a fruitful weekend for the four-time world champion. No points in the sprint race. Obviously, DNF'd in the main race. Had a poor start in both of them where he just seemed to bog down and just not be able to get power. and then he was just stuck playing catch up for most of the race. I think there was even a point where he almost ran into the back of one of the Hasses going down into turn five, turn six, I think it was. So reliability definitely plays a factor. You saw Hadjo with that spectacular spin as they were just about to go onto the long back straight. Oliver Behrman very alert and reacted well to miss the spinning Red Bull. So a bit of bad, I think bad luck definitely plays a factor in terms of reliability. But also, it's clear to see from Max Verstappen in his interviews that he does not like the new regulations. He does not like the 2026 cars. He was actually a bit more optimistic going into this weekend, but I think that was quickly dispelled after a woeful performance in both the sprint race and the race.
I mean, definitely, especially this early on in the year, only one practice session definitely wouldn't help the likes of the people struggling. But another team, which I suppose haven't have had I suppose the spotlight on them this weekend, but I would definitely say is Alpine, the first double point scoring performance since Brazil 2024. Franco Colapinto scoring first time he's scoring a point in a year and a half. Um, it was a very solid weekend for Alpine. Yes, they had luck involved, but they do look at least best of the rest in terms of the midfield.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm not going to give away too much because I will save a little bit for my winner of the week, which relates somewhat to Franco Colapinto and somewhat to Alpine. But yeah, a very solid performance, very encouraging. I was pretty hot on Gasly going into the season. If you remember in my predictions, I did say if the main runners were to have issues, that Gasly could be there to pick up a podium. They haven't so far, but who knows? Maybe a collision in Japan, maybe when they get into Miami, Alpine may be able to innovate further. Um, and I think if you had Gasly in your fantasy team, you had Franco Colapinto in your fantasy team, very good pickups if you were staying on a budget and if you'd overspent on the front runners like Max, the most expensive drivers like Max Verstappen, you would have been laughing. But if you did have Max Verstappen, that being said, it would have been a disappointing week, and especially if you had Red Bull as your constructor. I don't know what your team is looking like after this race, Veer.
Um, okay, but not great. I had Leclerc, which scored a lot of points for me. I also had Haas and Alpine, which scored great points for me. But also, I did put Max Verstappen in my team. The one surefire bet I put in before China to think, yes, he'll definitely score plenty full of points. Only to walk away on a sprint weekend with zero, I think is yeah really affected me. But I might as well talk about my driver of the week as it's that time of the episode. My driver of the week has to be Oliver Behrman. An absolutely fantastic performance. Points in the sprint race, points in the main Grand Prix P5, was fending off Gasly Verstappen for majority of the Grand Prix. Strategy was perfection. Had a really solid drive. Had that amazing save from not colliding with Hajar on the opening lap. He actually went off track, dropped down to I think P9 or P10, and works his way up again. And he is currently sitting P5 in the Drivers' Championship, which is weird to say. It's only round two, but he is definitely my driver of the week.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And you've actually stolen my driver of the week as well, because I was going to say Oliver Behrman as well for the exact same reasons. He's really settled into that Haas car. Obviously, after the first lap, he was actually down to P13 at the end of lap two
Oh
because he
wow.
started to he started to lose a couple of positions, even after the coming together with Isaac Hadjar. But he benefited from the safety car. He made that stop, and then he aced the restart to get past Pierre Gasly. And he wasn't afraid to go wheel to wheel with Max Verstappen. Wasn't afraid in the slightest. Solid performance, P5, and like you said, I think he's P5 in the Drivers' Championship, and scored 17 points so far. So very promising start for Oliver Behrman. But who does that leave for your loser of the week then?
Okay, my loser of the week. Actually, Aaron, I'll let you go first because I did my winner of the week first. So it's only fair.
I already said. I said Max
Oh
Verstappen.
yes.
So I will re-ask the question: Who is your worst driver of the week or loser of the week?
I'm gonna say, and I feel a little bit critical saying this so early on, but Arthur Lindblad. Um, I think he had an awful weekend. He had a massive lockup, I believe, in sprint quali. In Q2, he was kind of like, I suppose, stricken by the yellow flags of Bortoleto. But in the race, a little bit reckless. Spun out on a sprint by himself. In the race, he just didn't have the pace of the likes of the Alpines, the Hasses, of like his teammate, for example, who did fantastically well. And in a race where a lot of the front runners weren't really, I suppose, performing at that level, it was a race to capitalize on, especially because that RB looks somewhat competitive. And I think compared to what his teammates done this weekend, it's been a little bit poor. Um, so yeah, a little bit harsh, but I think compared to how he started off in Australia, he definitely feels himself that there's a lot to work on.
Definitely coming out of left field with that, but I can definitely see why. Do you think he set the bar too high with his first performance in Australia that made us all think, wow, this guy is he's the next Max Verstappen, he's the next Lewis Hamilton. I think it was kind of a okay, back to reality. He's still a young driver. He's in his second race. He can make mistakes. What do you
um,
make of that?
I would say I didn't want it to be like the Kevin Magnussen effect, where he does incredibly well in his first Grand Prix and then really is mediocre throughout the rest of his career. But that Red Bull, that Racing Bull does have pace. You look what Lawson did, double point scoring performance over the weekend. So that Racing Bull does have pace. But to be finishing nearly, I think, 20 to 25 seconds away from your teammate. I know it's only round two, but it wasn't the lack of pace. I think it was just more. Sorry, I don't know. I didn't think it was his crashes that were really, I suppose, worrying for me. It was just an overall lack of pace in terms of a field where it looks this weekend at least very kind of sporadic. So yeah, I feel bad now. You're making me feel bad putting him on as my worst flop. But yeah, we'll see what he
Fair
does in
enough.
Japan.
How do you see his trajectory going for the rest of the season? Do you see a downtrend? Do you see the Kevin Magnussen effect in play, or do you think he can recover going into the Japanese Grand Prix? Because it is a daunting circuit, very easy to spin it out. There's been drivers who've crashed out on the formation lap quite a few times. You can have drivers run it up the inside into that hairpin.
I would definitely say that Suzuka requires a lot of confidence, but I feel that especially in your first year, you have to have that type of confidence in your own ability. I see him definitely doing well in his career. He's a talented driver, and he's shown that already. In honesty, that Racing Bull is a fast car, and I would say that if he matches Lawson through his first season, which I think should be a decent target for himself, I think he would have done well in year one. But I mean, he's got pace. He's got raw pace. I think it's just now like we saw with Antonelli last year, it's just putting it all together, which just comes with, I suppose, race pace, as indeed. Okay, let's look towards the drivers' championship now, and I'm looking at it, and there's only 4 points now between the top two. Um, Aaron, we talked about this at the start of the episode. I'm going to ask you again after how much we've talked about so far. But is Antonelli looking at if you were in Toto Wolff's shoes and you were looking at Russell and Antonelli, do you see two contenders for this World Championship?
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say absolutely. I think before the season started, there was a little bit of sentiment between us two and Mir that there was a clear number one driver, and if tough decisions needed to be made and one of the drivers had to fall by the wayside or had to be sacrificed in order to benefit the other driver, it would be Antonelli. But I think clearly after two races that Antonelli can hang with Russell. He's won a race. He's got the pole position, and as you say, 4 points between them. I mean, it's either of those two's game at this point. And obviously, don't write off Ferrari. I mean, you've got Leclerc and Hamilton within a point of each other. Um, yeah, we've got the month off as well after the Japanese Grand Prix. We might have two different cars come back when we see when we join my when we go to Miami, we might see the Ferrari bridge the gap and even take a couple of wins off Mercedes. And being so being so early into the season, I still think it's anyone's game between the top two teams. You could also look further down the order. You've got Oliver Behrman scoring 17 points, which is more than Lando Norris, more than Gasly, more than Verstappen, obviously more than his teammate Esteban Ocon, who has yet to score a point this season.
Um, I would beg to differ. I feel Antonelli will. Well, I think Antonelli on a good weekend he can definitely match George Russell. But the one thing I would say is that Russell, even on an off weekend, he had this problem in Q3, for example, in qualifying. He only had one run able to do for himself, and he put it on the front row, which was absolutely exceptional. Yes, it was 2 tenths off, but still to not be really fully adjusted on a Q3 run, and it's kind of a little bit all over the place. Your car might not even be at full capacity. Was impressive. Russell on a bad weekend can still end up on the podium, whereas I think with Antonelli, there's still that sort of, I suppose, feeling that a bad weekend could end in a crash, a DNF, or further down than I suppose the P5 mark. I feel that someone like Leclerc or Hamilton has probably got a better chance to win a championship than Antonelli, solely on the fact that they've got expertise. I think Antonelli, as I said in our predictions video at the start of the year, he needs that year of being in a race winning car to fully comprehend um, kind of, I suppose, how racing at the front is different to racing somewhat in the midfield or for a podium. It's a different type of racing, and I think definitely if you look at next year, I think he'll definitely be in a fight to win. But still, there's a long way to go in the season, and as we said, it only takes one upgrade come the April break or in summer break, and it could completely flip the switch. So there's still a long way to go. But I also think for Antonelli, there's a long way to go to beat someone like Russell. Um, so I would definitely say that.
That's
Uh,
fair enough. I mean, you still don't sound too hot on Antonelli. I mean, what's he got to do? What's he got to do to win some favor in your eyes? He's just gone and set two records. I mean, he looks really comfortable in that Mercedes car. But yeah, as you said, he is still quite young. Maybe it's not his time yet. Maybe it is. But like we said, only two races into the season. And how do you think your predictions are changing now with kind of the knowledge that Max Verstappen probably won't be up with the front two teams for a while?
I think that in all honesty, we still need a lot more time. We need to go to different tracks to see where that Red Bull is because in Australia, Hadjar put it P3 in qualifying, and without that reliability issue, he definitely looked for a top five finish. Verstappen was in P6. He started from what P20, P19. So that car did have pace. And going into China, I thought that this will be another solid weekend for Red Bull. Not winning because I don't think I expected anyone but Mercedes to win. Yes, I did put Hamilton in my predictions to win, but I just don't see them winning. Um, Red Bull, but to be this far down was concerning. They're not even in the top three anymore. McLaren looked to have the advantage this weekend. So I don't know if it's a matter of like 2025, where we saw them really struggle in sort of kind of like the European season of F1, but then they had one upgrade come, I think Monza or Azerbaijan, and he went and won pretty much the rest of the Grand Prix available in the season, bar Mexico and Brazil. So there's still a long way to go, but just looking at his interviews, I just don't think that Verstappen is happy whatsoever. Is probably the most dire situation to be in, especially with someone like Ford who's new to the sport. And so I'll definitely say that there's still room for improvement, but we still have. It's only round two. There's so many things could happen. There's so many variables. But what I would say for someone like McLaren is that McLaren definitely don't look like they can. I suppose put together a race winning car, and I don't see McLaren uh, I wouldn't be surprised if Red Bull did better than McLaren this year.
Yeah, yeah, I could definitely see that prediction potentially coming true. We did say that bad luck played a factor. I think Verstappen just lost power this race. Same
Mm.
thing happened to Hadjar. I think you had that what was the super clipping issue with Hadjar as he was going into the back straight, just overloaded with power, which caused the Red Bull to spin out.
Yeah.
But the car definitely does have some pace, and there are some positives that you could look at. Obviously not from this weekend, but I think the car's still got some more to show, I think.
I guess the only good thing Red Bull have got going this year would probably be Hajar's pace across the weekend. We saw in Australia a P3 in quali. Of course, the Grand Prix was a DNF for him, but at the same time, in China, he seemed to be on the pace of Verstappen in pretty much all sessions. And so, I guess to be fair, at least we know accurately where that Red Bull is. It's not just Max Verstappen maximizing everything from it. Hadjar still got a decent amount of performance compared to the rest of the Red Bull drivers and the curse. Do you think that the curse is gone, or do you think Hadjar's really over exceeding expectation?
I think it's a little bit too early to say. I mean, with Perez when he joined Red Bull, you remember he won that Titanic Baku Grand Prix and he put it second on the grid in Imola in 2021. And then we saw what happened to his performances. You remember when Albon joined Red Bull in 2019, he had that amazing recovery drive in the Belgium Grand Prix. I think he was all the way down the field, made it all the way up to P5. So I'm still not too hot on Isaac Hadjar being the missing piece in the puzzle in the Red Bull second driver conundrum, just based on what we've seen before. But you never know. Maybe a few more performances and I'll change my mind. Like I hope you change your mind on Kimi Antonelli.
I think look, I think the recurring theme this episode has been give everything time because it's so early on in the season to comprehend and to see what the end product's going to be like. But there's one thing which is for certain is that Oscar Piastri has only got 3 points to his name and is sat in P12. Would you say this is the worst start to a season that reigning World Constructors Champions have had?
Yeah, one of, if not the worst. I mean, I don't know if we've got any F1 historians watching the episode, but I think that two DNSs for Oscar Piastri was one of the biggest contenders last year. You know, he was leading the championship, especially through that second half of the season until he lost it through a couple of mistakes. He was a serious threat to the world title, and it's just been issue after issue for McLaren. I think they've got a lot of work to do, but they did show some good performance in that sprint race. So when they're reliable, when they're on it, the drivers seem to be able to perform. Obviously, not at the level of Ferrari and Mercedes, but you know they could establish themselves as that third team and ahead of Red Bull as the season goes on. But you never know in F1.
Perfect. I think that is a decent place to wrap up this episode. Aaron, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share?
Nothing from me. I think that we have not got a race next week, but we have got Japan the week after. It's going to be an exciting Grand Prix. Will we see the two Mercedes drivers coming together? Could we see the Ferraris challenging for a win? I think it's all to play for, and I think that I'm definitely excited to see how the racing evolves on that different type of circuit like Suzuka is.
Yes, it is. Japan will definitely be a challenge for the drivers, but also for these new regulations. I think if they can make racing exciting here, then they can pretty much do it anywhere bar Monaco. But my final thought would definitely be if anyone is expecting the Japanese Grand Prix race review to be going out on the Monday after the Grand Prix, there might be a slight delay because the Podium Podcast have got overseas business to attend, which will fill up that week. But don't worry, we will be following the Japanese Grand Prix closely, won't we, Aaron?
Oh, absolutely. I think we'll definitely make sure we watch the race. We might, as I say, just have a little bit of delay getting that episode out to you guys, but that only means the quality is going to be even better as we've got a bit more time to let the results marinate and a bit more time to analyze um, everything that ensues after the Grand Prix. So we might have some new perspectives to give you.
Indeed. Anyway, thank you so much, Aaron, for coming on. Thank you guys for listening and watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and have a simply lovely day. Goodbye. If I had to go and pick something that I'll remember from the 2026 Chinese Grand Prix weekend, would definitely be Kimi Antonelli winning his first ever race in Formula One, and definitely a very, very, very confident yet reassuring drive from him. Aaron, how do you think he drove this weekend?